Good morning, everyone. I think people are gathering and we have a very high attendance. There's been a huge amount of interest in this conference for governance. It's almost been like a festival running the entire week. So it's very nice to see you. Well, except I can't actually see you, but we will be seeing you later. I hope you can see all of us. We've got some wonderful people to talk about governance, and in particular the future of governance. But I think before we start, I think we're running a little admin slide just so that we know the rules of the game. So the admin, I think it's fairly standard practice. Just run through those. As I say, we'll hear from our experts first, talking about governance, and then there will be an opportunity for a sort of Q&A discussion afterwards. So do please sort of store up your questions and your comments, and we'll come to those after we've heard from our four experts. And we'll try and make it a nice interactive and productive session. So I think we've covered the admin and we've welcomed everybody. So let's get into the meat of the subject. So this is about the future of governance, and I think we're at a very interesting stage in governance. I've been a governor, indeed a chair of governors, for many years now, and it's been interesting to observe the sort of the changing role of governance and the changing significance, I think, of governance. I mean, that's whether you're on a governing body of an outstanding school and your job is to keep it outstanding so that those children still get a really good education, or whether and that I've had that situation. I've also had the situation where we've taken on a school that was failing and we've had to turn it around, obviously with the head and the staff, the governance role is an interesting one, because we don't actually do the turnaround, but we have a huge role to play in the ethos of the school, in the quality of the education, and really the success of the outcomes for the children. And of course, that's been in a situation where the education structure itself has been changing. We had academies coming in sort of about 10-15 years ago. Now a very large number of schools are academies, particularly at the secondary level, either as single academies, small trusts, small federations, or multi-academy trusts, and we have the free schools as well, and of course the local authority maintained schools, and the political direction is very clear at the moment, which is towards schools grouping together in academies or federations, and obviously gaining from the sort of support that you get from a group of schools that can share resources, at a school level and at a sort of almost a sort of corporate level in terms of HR and finance, and that sort of function. So we're going to hear from as I say, four experts, all with slightly different viewpoint on governance. And I'm going to start with Caroline, but before that, we are big into, obviously, sort of diversity, inclusion, etc. And we are aware that we have a few people on the call who don't have the vision that we all just take for granted. So I'll introduce myself visually. I am Dominic McGonigal. I'm chair of 2 schools, and in my sort of day job, I'm an entrepreneur, director, and indeed a composer. And I am, let's say, late 50s, very late 50s. So tiny little bit of grey hair showing there, glasses, and I'm wearing a pink and blue striped shirt. And I am your host for this session. So now I shall now introduce Caroline. Caroline Doherty is Head of Education at the Key, which is a fantastic business that provides really good resources for schools, including some very good training for governors, and is sort of particularly keen to sort of talk about the remote governance that we've all been experiencing recently, the digitization of schools, which is something we thought was only going to happen to other people, and of course SEND. So Caroline, over to you.
Classic forgetting to mute there. How long would you like me to speak for?
I would say 4 or 5 minutes, and then we've got plenty of time for some discussions. I think that the discussion is going to be the interesting thing when we're talking about the future.
Lovely stuff. And I am a white British woman in my late 30s with short, brown, slightly unruly today hair. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Yeah, I think as Dominic said, tech and ed tech in schools used to be a sort of niche topic that a few people were banging a drum about and saying, ed tech could change everything in schools if only you would listen to us. And everyone said, hang on a minute, we're busy educating, we're not interested in technology. And obviously we've seen a huge amount of change that happened almost overnight. I do a lot of talking to school leaders and professionals, and it was incredible. Something that seemed so normal to me, the sort of Zoom call or Teams meeting, people were so, destabilized. They hadn't worked in that way before. They were used to people in rooms having conversations with each other and connecting in the one place. So I think it has been a huge change, obviously a huge change in governance as well, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk more about the sort of hybrid model that we're likely to experience going forward. I think for me, the most interesting thing is the fact that I think remote governance will enable a lot more people to remain involved. I think the role of a governor is getting increasingly demanding, arguably rightly so. This is a extremely important, responsible position, thinking about how other people's children are educated with other people's money. It is a huge responsibility, but in order to fulfill it and potentially keep a working life, other voluntary commitments and a family on the go, actually being able to do something that cuts down travel time, that actually gets you into the digital ecosystem of a school, being able to see things from the school's MIS or tracking system on a screen in live time rather than buried in 50 pages of paper that we were all flicking through. I think it will bring an immediacy, and that was one of the interesting things for me during COVID, because it skewed the well-ordered school calendar. The people who run schools know what they're going to be doing on the 23rd of February in September. The governing body, the calendar, follows this familiar pattern. And actually with COVID, it really changed that kind of support and challenge relationship, because things were evolving and changing so quickly, and important conversations had to happen at the time that they had to happen, not this sort of best fit model of, when do we have our meeting at this point, and what point are we doing this strategically? I think it really brought those things closer together. So that's interesting too. And as was mentioned, the key provides training. Obviously, there's lots of other training available elsewhere, but I think for me, I'm interested in a future where you have training as and when you really need it. And something that I've experienced in 13 years of being a governor myself is being in that session and going, I don't really know enough about this contextually to hang it on anything. You turn up at your governor induction and the person says, well, if you're a voluntary aided school, and you help, am I a voluntary aided school? I don't know if I have to listen to this. I don't know what it means. You don't know enough about your own context to apply the general points. And then, you know, if you learn something about exclusion panels and then you don't have to do one for another 2 years, again, it doesn't seem to make the best use of volunteers' very precious time. So what we're interested in is thinking about how can you get the knowledge to people who need to understand a situation, make sense of it quickly, and make the right decisions quickly at the point that they need it the most, rather than kind of sticking to this kind of very traditional calendar. And I'm sure there's lots of other things that we'll come on to discuss, particularly about the challenges facing boards and schools in the time ahead, but I'll wrap it up there to make time for others.
Good. Thank you very much, Caroline. Very interesting and very, very pertinent to be talking about remote working. You know, the challenges of remote working as a governor, and then actually the opportunities that gives you to carry out your governance role more effectively. So I'm now going to turn to Emma Gregory, or Emma G, since we have Emma G and Emma P. Emma is the head of the Academy Ambassadors Program, which is recruiting trustees for Academy trusts, which is obviously a sort of key role, because as well as, you know, governors doing the right thing, it's also having the right people round the table with the right skills. And I think Emma's going to give us some very interesting insights into sort of retention and diversity and recruitment of trustees that are really going to sort of add value to the governance picture. So Emma, over to you.
Thanks ever so much, Dominic. So for the benefits of the audience, I am female, white, British, in my mid-40s, with my hair is blonde, but it's not natural, and I'll leave it there. Thank goodness for the hairdressers being open. Thanks, Dominic. Yes, I'm very much here to discuss the role of volunteers coming into the sector, to see where we can take the sector going forward. And I'm really delighted to be here with this great panel. I think there are 3 things that I really wanted to cover off today, and that's really looking at the trajectory of the role of academies in the sector as a whole. The NGA, National Governance Association, has published an interesting report today, which has some great data in it, looking at just the shift in numbers of pupils who are now educated in academies and academy trusts. Close to nearly 1 million more than in maintained schools. However, the number of maintained schools as individual entities appears to be 3,000 more than actual academies. So I think that speaks a lot to the types of governance challenges when it comes to recruitment across the different elements of the sector. It's really fascinating. It'd be great to hear from the audience about that. Also, the Academy Ambassadors Programme is very much focused on connecting volunteers from business and the professionals, people who are in senior roles in business, to come and lend their expertise and knowledge from one sector to try and translate it to education. And I'm very clear that Academy Ambassadors is just one sourcing channel for boards to look at. It's really important, I think, that there are multiple sourcing channels for boards to seek people from. I would never advocate that 100% of the board, for instance, comes from a business background, because we need to really connect with what the community of the trust needs, and that will be beyond the skills of business people. However, my perspective will be very much of thinking about what's going on globally within governance, in the business and corporate world, looking at some of the trends and challenges and talking to them with an educational slant. So I think that's really, really exciting in terms of where we're going. And lastly, really the role of the pandemic on recruitment. I can't believe I'm saying this, and I've said it all the way through, but the pandemic has catapulted education like never before into the spotlight of importance, into just how much of a difference it makes to society. And as a programme, and I know that Hannah will probably talk about the same, we have been absolutely blown away by the calibre, the volumes of volunteers coming to us seeking to support, and also when we ask for help, people are saying yes a little bit more than they used to, which is brilliant. However, I do feel that there are some challenges coming in terms of boards, and where people are seeing that boards have not experienced the churn of trustees and governors over the pandemic because people have stayed. Now that the world is opening up, I'm anticipating that will change, and that will bring quite an interesting challenge and pressure to the sector. So again, really keen to talk about that with the sector. But I will stop there and hand it back over to Dominic.
Thank you very much, Emma, and yeah, very interesting example of our sort of remote working actually being an opportunity on the recruitment side. And I see we're already getting a question coming through, which is great. Thank you. Keep those questions coming, and we'll go on to the discussion fairly soon. So I'm now going to turn to Emma Perkin, who looks after the clerks. She is director of the Trust for Governance Professionals, who I know from personal experience play a huge role in the efficient functioning and the productive functioning of a governing body. They're the sort of unsung heroes that we don't normally hear from. So over to you, Emma.
Thank you very much, Dominic. So I'm Emma. I'm to follow through the introductions. I'm white British female, sadly going grey and whiter by the minute, thanks to the pandemic and my gene pool, and I'm wearing quite dark blouses and a blue shirt. So actually, Dominic, a slightly odd way to start this, but I'm going to challenge my introduction. So my specialism and what I want to thread through today is that I actually work with governance professionals, and I'm going to talk during the session today about the use of language, and I'm going to talk about the use of language across our schools. So I think one of the areas that is of particular interest to me is the differential between governors in maintained schools and those of us who are doing governance within academy trusts, what it means to be a trustee, what it means to be involved in school governance, and actually the language as a whole around what we're doing. For those of you who don't understand what I'm talking about, governance professionals are not clerks. Governance professionals have clerking in our remits, but governance professionals now are an evolving professional group that have come out of academisation, and they will be people who are responsible for the governance across trusts. And in the largest trusts in the country, we're looking at people who are responsible for education charities with 50, 60, 70 million pound budgets. So what I would like to talk about with the group and hear from the group is the advocacy for that role and the understanding of the importance that that role is going to bring as we develop governance. I will pick up obviously the points that Emma and Caroline have reflected on of what the pandemic has brought, and like both of them, I've actually seen some wonderful innovation that's come out of the pandemic, whether it's my board, which is primarily involves nuns who gamely got onto Zoom and have managed to continue. So I'm hoping that we move away from a world where we used to sit in primary schools on small chairs eating custard creams at 6 o'clock in the evening. So I look forward to hearing from everyone more broadly, and I'll hand back to you. Thanks, Dominic.
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you for picking me up on my language. I did use the term clerk deliberately because it is used, generically. But you're absolutely right. The governance professional landscape is so much wider, and indeed, even the clerk's role is not just taking minutes. Very far from it. Yes, I'm personally fortunate to be working with some incredible governance professionals working across very large multi-academy trusts. So I'm now going to turn to our fourth and final expert. Hannah Stolten is the CEO of Governors for Schools, which is straight down the line recruitment of governors, and I think has been very well placed in the pandemic to make use of the new online sort of remote world to recruit a whole new raft of governors right across the country and across different sectors, she quite rightly points out that it's not just about recruitment; it's about retention. No point in recruiting a governor and then they disappear after 3 months, having not attended a meeting, and about the CPD that goes with that. So over to you, Hannah.
Thanks ever so much, Dominic. To continue the theme, I am Hannah. I'm white British, short brown hair, glasses, and in my mid-40s. So thanks for the introduction. Yeah, you're dead right. We've had a really actually successful year in placing governors. We've placed over 2,000 governors in the last academic year. And what I'd really like to talk about today is how we can keep them, because it is an effort to get them to the door. I agree, Emma, we've had a huge number of people coming forward, really keen to give up their time. I think it's sort of, the pandemic has made people realise how important the education system is. Parents are more involved and want to take that step, and other people from professions, across the country. But I think what I'd like to talk to a little bit about is about the induction process. I think it's really important that a good induction makes sure that the governor knows about the role. We have generic induction information that we provide, the key provides, but it's not the same as knowing your school and knowing if you're in a maintained school, what your role is, if you're in a multi-academy trust, what the scheme of delegation says, and what your responsibilities are. I think what we've seen over the last year is a real mixed bag of people's feedback post-placement. Some people saying it's been a great experience, I have had a fantastic impact, I'm loving it, a year on. Other people saying, actually, I don't think I've had an impact, I don't, it's not for me, or I don't know what I'm actually here for, I'm just here to play lip service. So I think that induction is so key to making sure that once you've got a good governor on board who brings the skills that you want and brings that background information, that we're really making sure that we're making best use of their time and their skills. Thank you, Dominic.
Good. Thank you very much. So we've heard some very interesting contributions there. Really covering everything from recruiting governors right the way through to helping them have real impact in the education system. And certainly from my experience, that's the biggest sort of buzz that we as governors get, is actually knowing that you're actually making a difference, and then seeing that in the children as they go through their school career. So we're now on to the Q&A sort of discussion section, and we've got some questions coming through, which is fantastic. So please do pop your questions or comments into the Q&A, and we'll work through them. So first of all, we got a nice easy one, which is Emma G. You mentioned the NGA report. Can you pop a link up on the Q&A for people?
Yes, I have just tried to do it. So if someone can tell me if that worked, please let me know.
Okay, if not, maybe we'll do it or send it around later.
We'll send it around in the email afterwards, so I'll make sure.
Yeah. And I think Hannah, anyway, I think you're planning to send a little follow-up email with useful things, aren't you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Good. Well, we'll maybe note a few of those as we go along. So Emma G, also you have a question. You were talking very much about trustees and recruiting trustees, but do you help on the governance professional side?
No, I'm sorry that we don't help on that side. I wonder if I could refer to Emma P on this.
So over to Emma. That's your baby, isn't it?
So it's quite interesting, that point, Dominic, and if you don't mind, I'd just like to pick up Steve's point in the chat about my use of the term when I said governance professionals are not clerks. Steve, what I was trying to say there is that governance professionals is a job that encompasses a broad range of governance across the trust. It's clerking, and in no way is clerking viewed as a kind of lesser role. Actually, one thing that we are constantly trying to advocate for is the understanding of the importance of effective governance support across the trust from bottom up. So if that came across in the wrong way, Steve, then I apologise. In terms of the answer about recruitment, this is something we're actively discussing, because one of the things that I think is quite complicated for trusts at the moment is that there isn't a go-to place for recruitment for governance professionals. So people are using different portals, they're using kind of local media, they're using national media, but unlike other sectors, you know, for example, the education professional, though I know this is kind of moving more forward in terms of things like the tests, there isn't a go-to place, but there isn't also, and I think Steve's comment in the chat kind of exemplifies this, there isn't a standard understanding of what that role looks like. So we are trying to work, we're working with the Department for Education at the moment, we're also working with the Chartered Governance Institute to almost understand a pathway of progression that you can see how these roles develop. So the person who is working with a maintained school in clerking capacity with a single school compared to the person who is providing board support for one of the larger trusts, they are different roles, there are a different segue of role. And I think helping the sector understand those differences, but also helping the sector know where they can go is something that we would like to do. And I'm meeting Emma next week, so maybe it's something that we could pick up about, is how we kind of take that support forward more broadly.
Thank you very much, Emma. I'm now going to turn to Victoria Franklin, who's made a very, very interesting comment, which I think will provoke some good reactions. And also, I notice, Emma, Victoria, that you're you have to leave shortly, so I hope you're still on the call. Victoria has said, you know, she's been a governor for many years in a number of different roles, and currently a chair, and is noting, you know, that the changes in governance that we've been talking about, and indeed the sort of the increased sort of pressure of the governance role. I mean, we're effectively sort of non-executive directors, and as she says, you know, we're sort of unpaid management in a way, which is totally true. And Victoria, you're saying that recruitment therefore is difficult. It's difficult to get people to sign up to that, because it's such an onerous task, especially as a chair. And I will open this up, but I mean, I want to sort of add a kind of personal comment on that, because I sort of have probably had a similar sort of experience to you as a governor and chair of governors for many years, and it does strike me that it is a sort of quasi-professional role, like a non-exec role. It does have huge responsibility and pressure, and I think there is a tendency for it to take an enormous amount of time. I mean, I do hear sort of anecdotally about some chairs of governors who sort of go into the school and spend 2 days a week in the school, which is, you know, more like an exec chair role that we would have in the private sector. And I do think it's important that we don't abuse the sort of voluntary contribution and have a realistic time commitment, I think, for governors and especially chairs. But let me open that up to the sort of the professionals around the table who are responsible for recruiting. I mean, in particular, Hannah, you're responsible for recruiting governors, and then you quite rightly said retention's an issue. So what are your thoughts on this?
I think when we did a survey of our governors, most say that they spend about 7 hours a month on their governance duties. That's for a standard governor. Definitely agree. As a chair of governors myself, as chair, it's a whole lot more. And I think that is a consideration for people if they're going to step into that role, about how they manage it. I would say, as a chair, I think it really fluctuates. I know at the end of last term, I seemed to be in school an awful lot, but you know, well, obviously with COVID, I wasn't. But you know, pre-COVID, there were times when I was in school a lot, and other times when actually it was a much more hands-off role, as it should be, as a sort of strategic role. Regarding paying governors, I think the danger, I guess, might be that people would be motivated for the wrong reasons to take up the challenge of being a governor. And I think we've had conversations previously about whether it could be a paid role, but yeah, I think its motivations might be a bit of a challenge as to why people would take it up if it was a paid role.
And do others have a sort of take on that, Caroline?
I just wanted to offer a sort of reflection on a practical level. I've been a chair, I've been a vice chair, and now I'm just chairing a committee. And actually, I took a 6-month maternity leave while I was chair, and actually taking a step back and trying to work out how to delegate meaningfully, so that other members of the governing body actually felt like they had more of a stake and a responsibility. So we did beef up the committees and the roles of those committee chairs and the role of the vice chair. And since then, it has been more manageable. And we actually, one of our parent governors stepped up to take the chair. I think it's hard when you're in the middle of it, and it does feel like a mammoth task sometimes, but sometimes understanding, organizational sustainability. And you might have a retired chair who can do everything, but what when they actually want to retire from being governor as well? Delegation can make a real big difference.
Yes, thank you. And certainly, the private sector, a sort of non-exec role will be typically sort of half a day a month up to 2 days a month, and that will be the sort of the expected time commitment, which feels about what it should be as a governor. I'm now going to take a couple of questions. Thank you very much, Victoria, for that very interesting question. So I want to take two questions about the clerking and governance professionals. So we've got Steve Cleary, I think Emma mentioned, saying that governance professionals are not clerks. Really, they are. They are governance professionals. Clerks are governance professionals. So maybe you could clear that one up. And then perhaps also cover Catherine Cochrane's question. How would you define the difference between clerk and governance professional? For many years, there's been a very grey area, a lot of debate about the role and remit of the clerk. So Emma, perhaps you could take that.
So I think rather than get into too much of a kind of clerk governance professional and the boundary, I think what we need to step back and look at, and married to a now retired head teacher, I think historically there has always been a thing in education between the teaching staff and the support staff. And what we are seeing now with the rise, what academisation has brought is the move to move to school trusts, where we're often seeing trusts over 30, 40 schools, but also trusts over 3 or 5 or 6 schools. And in that, the move to a sort of centralised trust team has really changed how we approach staffing within schools and within education. And we've seen it with CFOs coming into place, CEOs coming into place, COOs coming in place, and governance is now being part of that journey. So I think what we're trying to talk to the sector about is that actually the proposition of how you support a trust board is very, very different within an academy trust to the proposition of how you support a maintained school governing body. And that for me is the kind of essence of what we're trying to get across here. And it is a pathway journey. I think it was very interesting in the Academy Trust Handbook this year that the Department for Education has started to use the term governance professional. I know that there are challenges with that term, and I think Steve is identifying those challenges with the kind of concept. But as yet, we haven't found a term that kind of fits better. So I think it is about looking at the governance of your trust. If you're a 10-school trust, you have a trust board that is potentially working over board committees, you're working with members, you're working with the executive team, you're working with 10 schools and 10 schools governance. And the governance professional for me is the person that Lord Agnew very nicely called us the glue. So we're the glue. And I think, Dominic, your reflection that when trusts on school boards have had great governance support, they know what I'm talking about, they get it. And I think increasingly that is coming into the fore. And that for me, in terms of looking forward about how we support our school leaders to do great jobs, then I feel that this role, in whatever way we call it, on whatever shape we talk about it, is absolutely pivotal. I hope that answers the questions that were coming through.
Thank you, Emma. So now we want to move on to diversity and inclusivity, which is obviously is a big issue. We've seen the various surveys on governors, and there's a big bias, particularly to older people. I mean, yes, there are other biases as well, but I think it is something that's seen as something you do at the end of your career or when you're retired. So Ayaz Patel has asked, what are your own experiences of increasing diversity and inclusivity on your own boards, if there are vacancies, and what have been the barriers? I mean, if I may, I'll kick that off. You have asked about my own experiences, and I was brought in as chair of a school sort of 3 or 4 years ago, and I actually was moving into an academy trust and had the benefit of being able to create an entirely new board from scratch. And we did the recruitment mostly through Governors for Schools, and we recruited a smallish board. We've recruited 9 people in total, and the age profile was the complete opposite of the sort of standard. So I was the old lag, which has some benefits of the experience, of course, but 2/3 of the board were, and indeed still are, under 35, which is quite a sort of turnaround. But that was an unusual opportunity of creating an entirely new board. But who would like to give their experiences of diversity and inclusivity?
Okay.
Hannah, yes.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Emma.
Well, Hannah first, yeah.
Okay, well, we ran a session on diversity yesterday. Matt, if you could maybe drop the link in the chat, that might be useful for people. On my own board, it's something that we have looked at, and again, I've used Governors for Schools to recruit new people to try and address the balance, I suppose, older people versus younger people, and to ensure some ethnicity, diversity on ethnicity. I do think, again, we're coming back to remote governance, it has actually enabled a staff governor who potentially would not be able to join because she lives quite far away from the school to take up the role. So that's been quite a benefit for us to increase diversity on our board, that actually some people who would not have been able to join. And we also had another governor who moved during the pandemic to be closer to her family, and she has maintained her position on the board. They know the area, obviously the staff governor really knows the school well, but having them, they still come into school. Obviously the governor who's moved, she's not a million miles away, but it has meant that we've kept her, which has been fantastic. As a younger Black governor, it's been fantastic to keep her, I would say.
Excellent, thank you, Hannah. And Emma, you wanted to give a view.
Thank you. Yes, so we're seeing an awful lot of boards coming to Academy Ambassadors saying that they have recognised the need to become more diverse as a board. I think the one thing that we are really keen to say is that recruitment is not the first step in that journey, and actually if it's seen as the first step, it often fails. So I think that what we try to advise is that really think carefully about what your trust wants to achieve in the next 3 to 4 years. Think about, do you have the expertise on your board to take your trust forward successfully? And if not, who is going to help you, and why do you need them? And that will help you craft a really engaging proposition to take to somebody who perhaps didn't realise they could add value. Regardless of where they're from, it's about what can they do. And a number of colleagues across the sector who are huge advocates for education amongst increasing the awareness across different groups of people say, the problem is that people are not brave enough to ask people to do this job. And I think that it is about getting out of our comfort zones and being really clear about who we want and why, and going to them with that direct ask.
I was just going to commend the NGA's research into this. I participated in facilitating some of the focus groups around that, and I really recommend reading it. I mean, I'm a white person, and to hear people's experiences around, you know, not understanding what the role is and feeling out of place, and you know, you might think you've set up a really nice first meeting and been really welcoming, but until you understand it from another person's perspective and their experience of it, I think it can be hard to understand. And completely agree with Emma's point. It's beyond recruitment. It's not just saying these are the pool of people that applied and like we can't do anything about that. It is about going much bigger, and there are some useful points in the NGA's report there as well. So I don't know if Matthew, you've got that, or I can share it in the chat.
Yes, if we have got any, you know, a link to the NGA research, I think would be useful. And anything else, Matthew, and that you can pull together for our benefit afterwards. Now we've got two questions really about sort of effectiveness of governors. So Hayley Watts has asked, you know, how do we ensure governors make an impact rather than being a tick box exercise, or is it just a tick box exercise? And then John Frankis has sort of added, you know, as well as the benefits of virtual governance, do the panel perceive that the pandemic has eroded some aspects of governance, you know, largely due to the focus on operational issues? And if so, do we need a governance recovery program? Caroline, I mean, maybe you could take this first, from your perspective at the key.
Sorry, I was racing looking at the NGA report there.
This was, so firstly, is governance just a tick box exercise? And you know, how do we remain effective as virtual governors?
Well, I think what I'm really interested in, and this is really me speaking from my own experience, as rather than on behalf of the key, is, you know, yes, there are a lot of roles and responsibilities laid out there for a governor, but experience on different governing bodies, which is something that not that many people necessarily get to see. You get immersed in your own school and the way things are run, is that it does look subtly different. And particularly if you want to feel that you're having an impact, what that looks like could be very different depending on what challenges are facing your school. My school has variously been through a rapid school improvement journey, a failed attempt to academise, and a bunch of other quite big things. And you know, there's been no shortage of really meaningful work, meaningful conversations, support and challenge for the senior leadership team there. So I think it really kind of depends on the dynamic in some ways between the school and the governors. I guess if somebody is, you know, using remote means to kind of keep people at arm's length, it might feel like that a little bit. And that's where I do think you need a hybrid model of, you do actually have to build relationships, which is mighty hard on a Zoom call. You know, so there are those longer strategic conversations that as and when pandemic allows do need to be held face to face. I think those would be my reflections.
Thank you. And what about that challenge that it's just a tick box exercise, Emma?
I was just going to come in to say, Dominic, that I think the pandemic has encouraged a conversation about the role becoming ever so slightly operational, but I think it's something that has always been on the radar in one of the challenges of a sector that's evolving. And when any organisation is going through change and challenge, I think boards can be drawn into areas beyond the remit of the board's focus because of a lack of capacity in the trust elsewhere or in the individual school. And I feel that one of the benefits of having these discussions is to raise the reminder that in terms of governor retention, actually, if we can make the role if we can remind ourselves as a sector just about that difference between the role of the board and the role of the executive team, and both of those roles in light of governance, I think that will help people to remain in post longer. A lot of the people that we work with and we support, some trusts who are going through very challenging times, have been stepping down because the role has become too much, too operational, and I think that is a conversation that I really welcome highlighting again.
Thank you. And then we've got another area that we should be looking at, which is succession planning. Robin Pattinson has said, you know, he thinks that delegation is important, but not always easy. And I think we sort of touched on that really in terms of the role of the governor, but also succession planning. Robin's just taken over as chair and is already thinking about where he might be in a few years' time. So any thoughts on succession planning? I suppose really sort of Emma and Hannah, this is probably your bag, isn't it?
Could I just come in here first?
Yes, yeah, please.
That's all right. So I think that there's something that's quite interesting. One of the questions we were asked to reflect on is kind of horizon gazing for education over the next kind of period of time. And I think there's something that's really quite interesting if we sit with academisation just for a short time initially, which is that we are facing a time period now where the generation of leaders who first started out in school trusts are basically approaching retirement. So you're starting to see that embryonic first tranche of leaders retiring and moving on. And I think school trusts have significantly changed education leadership entirely in terms of the relationship between individual schools and leaders. So I think in terms of succession planning, it's succession planning across the board. We need to be thinking about it from the perspective of the leadership in our schools, the education leadership, but also the governance leadership. The Confederation of Schools Trusts has done some really interesting work around this. And the idea that we might look to bring practice from other sectors around things like establishing nominations committees, and that we actively look, and it feeds on your point, Emma, about thinking, you know, 3 years in advance, where are we going to be as a board, what skills and experience we do. And I think it's a really bold move as a new chair to be saying, actually, I'm new into role, but I want to be looking at how I develop that and what I do. And I think it pulls into the point we've just been talking about recruitment, about diversity of boards, really understanding where that next tranche of leaders are coming, both your governance leaders and your education leaders, I think is of vital importance. Sorry.
Thank you. Emma, Hannah?
Yeah, I would just say we ask our governors a year on after they've been placed and 2 years on after they've been placed whether they would consider the chair role, and between 20 and 30% tell us that yes, they would. So I think it is about having conversations with the governing board, finding out who has potential interests to sort of move into that role, but not necessarily just that role. I think it's really key as a chair to be speaking to your governors and finding out where their interests lie. And then you can hopefully, you know, encourage them to join different committees, and they can make those steps, and therefore the succession planning sort of starts to happen quite naturally. You're not having to force people into roles, but actually just by speaking to them, you can sort of encourage people to think a little bit more long term, hopefully.
Thank you. Emma G?
I think Caroline's got her hand up.
Caroline, sorry, Caroline.
I was just going to say, I think it really helps to either have conversations with people individually or send out surveys and kind of keep checking in on people, because what is hard is these are volunteers, and then, you know, anticipating or expecting them to step up and take these roles, kind of need to get, where are you at this year, what's going on at work, at home, and these sorts of things, and kind of keep that in balance, because you don't want to find out the person you'd kind of earmarked to take over your chair job is out of there. So I think it's kind of keeping that conversation going.
Thank you. Emma?
Just picking up on Emma's point on horizon scanning, and I mentioned that I was quite keen to bring in a perspective from corporate world, and the global organisation EY has produced quite an interesting report this year. Again, I'll share the link with it, and they say there are 4 key areas that boards are really looking to. The first is creating that long-term value, and there's a really catchy little phrase they say, which is about solving for the now, exploring the next, and reimagining the beyond. So that's very much the phases of strategy. The second is about resilience and agility in the face of uncertainty, which speaks to every organisation, I think. The other one is the talent strategy. So that's not just the talent within the organisation, but also on the board. And Linklaters as well have produced a really interesting guide, just in terms of how you monitor culture in the organisation beyond just doing employee surveys. And I would really urge boards to have a look at that if that's an area of interest. And the last is something that came up at the NGA Awards the other week about talking about the environment and the social governance of our organisations. And I think there'll be no doubting that if there's anything that children are talking about, it is the environmental impact and how we are responsible in this organisation. And trusts are, the education sector is such a massive employer, massive footprint in this country. If we're not talking about what we're doing in that respect, then we are really needing to think again, I think. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. And now we've got a challenge from David Ewell saying the panel seems to be equating the notion of academies with that of multi-academy trusts in all their explanations, which doesn't reflect the actuality of many single academy trusts. So I mean, that's a very good point, because actually we have a very mixed system now. We have academies, we have free schools, we have large multi-academy trusts, we have small multi-academy trusts, we have federations, we have single academy trusts, and of course we have maintained schools with the local authorities, etc. So and that obviously has a big impact on the future of governance. So who wants to tackle that one?
So can I just talk? So I think you're entirely right. It's very interesting when you look at the data. I think there's something like over 1,000 single academy trusts in the country. So by far and large, the majority of trusts are there. From a governance perspective, I think being a trustee of a single academy trust is incredibly challenging, because the guidance is not written for single schools. So I think you're trying to work within a context that makes it very challenging for you. I suppose my one reflection, having the deep privilege of speaking to many trustees and many chairs and through the governance leadership programme work I've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years, is if we reflect on Gavin Williamson's desire to see schools come into families of trust, I have only once spoken to a trust who said that they were joining someone. Everyone else said that everyone was joining them. So how's this going to work for us? How are we going to do it? And what does that look like? And I think as boards, again, going to your point, Emma, of horizon scanning, we need to have a really strong understanding of who we are, where we want to go, who's around us, what does that look like, and how we have that dialogue. And I think one of the interesting challenges, I think, for us moving forward is to find that way of peer working, peer conversations. And I think that that's where work like the Confederation of Trusts, work like Academy Ambassadors, bringing people together to have those dialogues, to be able to see practice across the board is really helpful. But I think from my perspective, the challenge of governance in a single academy trust is a difficult one. And, you know, huge respect to colleagues who are doing that.
Absolutely. Other observations on that?
I think my only observation from my perspective is that the scale of the challenge is significantly different between those 2 differentiators. From a recruitment perspective, when we are supporting trusts to find people, we do try to keep the principles of governance very close to us in terms of understanding that if you're a trustee in a single academy and a trustee in an academy trust of scale, actually the core functions are the same. And I think the challenge is as I said before, the executive governance support may be very different in those organisations, which means that the role becomes quite different day to day. So I'm not sure if that's added an awful lot, but that was just my perspective on it.
Thank you, and a very, very good question. Yes, Caroline.
And I just wanted to echo what Emma P was saying. I think, you know, a lot of the schools that are part of this sort of earlier multi-academy trust, you know, there were clear reasons about school improvement. A lot of those schools were already working together in groups or federations or dioceses. There were those connections there, but this sort of next phase, if indeed that is what happens, it is going to require people to know who they are and what they are about, and how they can find people to partner with. And I think that's activity that hasn't really happened to date for a lot of people. So it will be a big adjustment.
Thank you. And governors play a huge role, because I mean that gets to the heart of governance, of the vision for the school, and the ethos of the school that then creates the environment in which education can happen. So we're approaching the end of our time. I'm aware there are a couple of questions and sort of comments that we haven't been able to cover. In particular, Ayaz has asked, you know, what happens to issues of governance if a school is rated inadequate? You know, the governors have a huge role there. And also there was a question about sort of where else we should be recruiting governors other than business, you know, because clearly we want governors from a range of parts of the community. Maybe Hannah, we could cover those in the follow-up email. But I just want to end by just asking each of the panelists to give a very, very quick sort of quick soundbite answer to you know, where you think the value add for governors is going to be over the next few years. What do you think the real value add is going to be? So let's start going reverse order. So Hannah first.
Thank you. I think right now schools are coming back to some sense of normality, although it's nothing like what it was before. So I think right now the value add of governors is bringing the skills that the schools need to make sure that they're having effective challenge. They're implementing new things. They are consistently doing that. You know, it's not back to normal and how it was. They're looking at new strategies, and I think as a governor, your role is there to make sure that you're challenging the staff, making sure that you're asking the right questions. I think that's the main thing where we can add value. And it's the same as it has ever been, but probably more important now than ever before as we, you know, face these uncharted waters.
Thank you. And then Emma P.
I think my hope is that we hold on to some of the amazing innovation that has come out over the last 18 months. You know, I've had the trauma of 3 university-age children homeschooling a year 13, seeing from the kind of parental end the amazing work that's done within schools. And I think what governance, I hope, can do is to build on those innovations, build on those different ways of working, build on the collegiality that has come, and I suppose help school leaders have that time to step back and reflect. I mean, like Hannah says, it's what we've always done, but I really, really hope that when we come out of this, and we're not out of this, but when we come out of this, we can look back and we can see great innovation, great working and great change that has come from the pandemic, and that we are able to celebrate some positivity out of what has been, you know, phenomenally traumatic period for all of us.
Thank you. Thank you. Emma G.
I would say it's about looking outside yourselves and continuing to recognise the amazing support within the sector, whether that's collaborating as part of a group of academies in a formal way, or if you're in a trust already, looking to other trusts for that sharing of support, or if you're a single school, thinking about how you've been able to develop those relationships during the pandemic and just keeping them going and looking for the future.
Thank you. And Caroline?
Yeah, I think for me, we keep talking about this new normal and kind of when is it going to start and when are we going to be able to say post-pandemic, and we might not ever be able to say that. And I think we need to get out of this feeling of like, when it happens, we'll know what to do, to saying we need to shape it. There are big conversations about equity, catch-up, diversity, sustainability, huge things coming down the pipe for schools around funding, SEND, you know, conversations about whether or not to become an academy trust. These are huge issues, and actually we need to grab them as governors and governing boards and governance professionals and move ahead, not kind of wait for the all clear to get post-pandemic.
Thank you very much. And so we're now at the end of our session, there's one final plug at 4 o'clock this afternoon. There's the launch of All Pupils, Every Ambition, which is a new campaign from Governors for Schools, really about very much what we've been talking about for the last hour, about bringing those skills in from the community into governance. So if you can join us for that, you'll be most welcome. Please log on. And finally, a big thank you to everybody. There's sort of 100+ people in the webinar. Thank you very much for being with us and for some wonderful questions and comments and challenges. And obviously particular thanks to Hannah Stolton, to Emma Perkin, to Emma Gregory, and to Caroline Doherty for your insights, you know, sharing your experience with us so generously. It's been a fascinating subject, and you know, looking at governance sort of in the past and particularly in the future. And I think we've all learned a lot, and I hope we've perhaps also been inspired as well. So thank you all very much, and I hope I will see you at 4 o'clock.